The cardboard smelled like rain and exhaust fumes, but to Daniel Crane, it smelled like survival. A fortress built from discarded shipping boxes behind the closed-down electronics store on 5th and Morrison. His hands, calloused and dirt-etched, trembled as he unwrapped the gas station sandwich he'd found in the dumpster behind the 7-Eleven, still sealed, expiration date 2 days past but close enough to safe. 53 years old, former electrical engineer, current ghost. The city moved around him like he was made of air, invisible except when someone needed to step over him. He'd learned to be small, to take up no space, to apologize for existing. But hunger, real hunger, the kind that makes your stomach eat itself, that made a man notice things, like the girl huddled in the alley mouth, shaking so hard her bones seemed to rattle. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, impossibly thin, with skin the color of birch bark and eyes too large for her face, luminous green that caught the streetlight like a cat's. Her ears, Jesus Christ, her ears, tapered to delicate points beneath matted silver blonde hair. Daniel blinked hard, wondering if malnutrition had finally cracked his grip on reality. But no, she was solid, terrifyingly real, dressed in what looked like torn silk that might have been white once but was now the gray of city grime. She was staring at his sandwich like it was the last star in a dying universe. Daniel knew that look. He wore it himself most days. The rational part of his brain, the part that had once calculated voltage loads and designed circuit boards, screamed that she was someone else's problem, that he had barely enough for himself, that survival was a zero-sum game on these streets. But the other part, the part that still remembered tucking his own daughter into bed 15 years ago before the cancer took her, before his wife left, before the drinking started and the job ended and the apartment became a memory, that part moved his hands. "Hey," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. "You hungry?" The girl flinched, pressing herself against the brick wall. Her eyes tracked him with animal wariness. "I'm not going to hurt you." Daniel broke the sandwich in half, even though it meant his own stomach would scream at him later. He extended the larger piece toward her, keeping his distance. "It's okay. It's food." She stared at the offering like it might be a trap. Then her small hand darted out, impossibly fast, and snatched the sandwich. She shoved it into her mouth with desperate, gulping bites, not chewing, barely breathing. Daniel watched her eat and felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd thought had calcified years ago. "Slow down," he said gently. "You'll make yourself sick. Before we start, subscribe now so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Oh, and before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love hearing from you and always read every message." The girl finished eating and finally looked at him, really looked at him, with those impossible green eyes. Up close, he could see the delicate network of veins beneath her translucent skin, the way her ears moved slightly, tracking sounds he couldn't hear. Not human. Definitely not human. But hurt, definitely hurt. "What's your name?" Daniel asked. She said nothing. Her small body had stopped shaking, at least. "I'm Daniel. I used to be a lot of things." He smiled, though it felt strange on his face. "Now I'm just a guy who shares his dinner sometimes." The girl's lips moved, forming words so quiet he had to lean in to hear. "Eliana." The name fell from her mouth like music, like bells made of starlight. Daniel nodded as if strange names from impossible children were perfectly normal. Maybe they were. Maybe the universe had more rooms than he'd been taught. "Eliana," he repeated, getting the pronunciation wrong but trying. "That's a beautiful name. Where are your parents?" Her expression shuddered immediately, those luminous eyes going flat. Daniel recognized that look too, the face you make when the answer to a question is a wound that hasn't scabbed over yet. "Okay," he said. "You don't have to tell me. But you can't stay here. It's not safe. The city at night." He trailed off. She probably knew exactly how unsafe it was. Eliana looked down at her small, dirty hands. "I cannot go home. I'm broken. Father sent me away." The words were formal, archaic almost, carrying an accent Daniel couldn't place. But the pain underneath them was universal. "Broken how?" Daniel asked, though he suspected he knew. He'd been broken too, according to everyone who mattered. Too sad. Too drunk. Too much grief. Not enough will to live the way normal people lived. "I eat," Eliana whispered, shame coloring her voice. "I eat and never stop growing. I am glutton. I am shame to the court." Daniel's engineer brain kicked in automatically, running diagnostics. A child who ate constantly and never felt full, hyperphagia, Prader-Willi syndrome, or a dozen other metabolic disorders. But those didn't explain the ears, the eyes, the skin that seemed to emit its own faint light in the darkness. Your father sent you away because you're hungry? Daniel heard the anger in his own voice, sharp and sudden. Because your body doesn't work the way he wanted? Eliana nodded, her silver hair catching lamplight. That's not being broken, Daniel said fiercely. That's having a medical condition. That's having a body that needs help, not shame. She stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. Maybe he had. Daniel made a decision then, the kind of decision that changed trajectories, that split timelines into before and after. He'd made so few decisions that mattered in the last decade. This one felt like stepping off a cliff with no idea if there was ground below. You can stay with me tonight, he said. It's not much, just some cardboard and a sleeping bag, but it's dry and it's quiet. Tomorrow we'll figure something out. Eliana's eyes widened. You would share your shelter? With me? Why wouldn't I? Because I am exiled. Because I bring dishonor. Because, her voice broke. Because even my own father could not look at me anymore. Daniel felt fury rise in his throat like bile. He'd met plenty of fathers who couldn't look at their children. Men who prioritized image over love, comfort over truth. He'd almost become one himself after Emma died, before the drinking numbed him too much to feel anything. Then your father is a fool, Daniel said quietly. Come on. Let's get you somewhere safe. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm Daniel had forgotten was possible. The rhythm of caring for another living thing. Eliana stayed close to his makeshift camp, hiding when others approached, emerging only for Daniel. He shared everything he found, half-eaten donuts from the bakery's trash, day-old bread from the shelter, cans of soup he heated over a small camping stove he'd scrounged from a dumpster. She ate everything he gave her with that same desperate intensity, and then, an hour later, she was hungry again. Daniel started keeping a journal, his engineer's mind demanding data. How much she ate. How often. Her weight, estimated by the way she felt when he carried her across puddles so her ruined silk shoes wouldn't get wetter. The numbers told a story. Eliana was gaining weight steadily, her body filling out the way a starved child should, but her hunger never decreased. If anything, it intensified. Does it hurt? He asked one evening as they sat together behind the electronics store, watching the sunset paint the alley orange and gold. The hunger? Eliana considered. Not hurt like pain. Hurt like empty. Like I am whole that cannot be filled. Daniel knew that feeling too. Different source, same ache. We need to find you help, he said. Real help. A doctor, someone who understands. He gestured vaguely at her ears, her luminescent skin, the way she could hear rats moving in the walls 3 buildings away. No doctors, Eliana said sharply. Father tried doctors. They said I was curse. They said I was punishment for his pride. Then they were idiots. Daniel's voice was flat. Medical conditions aren't curses. They're just biology behaving in unexpected ways. Eliana tilted her head, studying him. You are strange, Daniel Crane. Yeah, he agreed. I get that a lot. No, she said seriously. Strange like, kind. Like you see me as person, not as problem to solve or shame to hide. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. You are a person. A kid who deserves to eat without shame, who deserves to be loved even when her body doesn't cooperate. Tears tracked down Eliana's pale cheeks, glowing faintly in the dimming light. I miss him, she whispered. Even though he sent me away, I miss my father. I know, Daniel said, and he did. He missed Emma every day, missed her laugh and her questions and the way she'd crawl into his lap when thunderstorms scared her. Missing someone didn't stop just because they were gone, or because they'd hurt you. Tell me about him, Daniel said gently. Eliana's face transformed. He is king of the autumn court, ruler of the threshold lands between your world and mine. He is 600 years old and has never lost a battle. His hair is like copper wire and his eyes are like amber. He can make trees grow with a thought and heal wounds with a touch. She paused. But he could not heal me. And I think that broke something in him. Daniel absorbed this information. Alternate dimensions, immortal elf kings, magical healing, with the same pragmatic acceptance he'd given to her pointed ears. The universe was bigger and stranger than anyone knew. Why not this? Parents aren't supposed to give up on their kids just because they can't fix them, Daniel said. That's not how love works. How does love work? Eliana asked, her voice small. Daniel thought about Emma, about holding her hand during chemotherapy, about reading her stories even when she was too weak to keep her eyes open, about staying present even when it hurt so much he wanted to die. Love works by showing up, he said finally. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Eliana leaned against his shoulder, a tiny warm weight that felt like purpose. You showed up for me. Yeah, Daniel said softly. I guess I did. On the 37th day, Daniel kept count, unable to break the engineer's habit of logging data. Everything changed. They were eating together behind the electronics store, splitting a bag of slightly stale bagels Daniel had sweet-talked out of the morning shift worker at Einstein's, when the air itself seemed to tear. No sound, no warning, just a sudden wrongness in the fabric of reality, like space had too many dimensions and some of them were folding in on themselves. A man stepped through the tear. No, not a man. An elf, tall and terrible and beautiful in the way that catastrophic things are beautiful. Forest fires, tsunamis, gods. His hair was indeed like copper wire, pulled back from a face of sharp angles and ageless authority. His eyes, amber shot through with gold, swept the alley with the cold precision of a predator. He wore armor that seemed grown rather than forged, organic plates of dark wood and bronze that moved with him like skin. Power radiated from him in waves Daniel could actually feel, pressure building in his sinuses, electricity crawling over his skin. This was a king. This was Aliana's father. Aliana went rigid against Daniel's side, her small body vibrating with terror and longing in equal measure. Father, she breathed. King Therian's gaze locked onto his daughter, and for a moment, Daniel saw raw emotion crack through the regal mask, relief so profound it looked like pain, followed immediately by something harder, colder. Aliana. The king's voice resonated with harmonics that hurt Daniel's ears, layers of sound human vocal cords couldn't produce. You have been found. Aliana's voice failed her. She pressed closer to Daniel. Therian's amber eyes slid to Daniel then, really seeing him for the first time. The king's expression cycled through confusion, contempt, and finally something like dawning horror. You have been dwelling with this? Therian's gesture encompassed Daniel's stained jacket, his cardboard shelter, his unwashed hair and broken shoes. This human refuse. Daniel felt the old shame try to rise, the voice that said he was worthless, that he deserved to be invisible, that his pain was his own fault. But then he felt Aliana trembling against him, and a different voice spoke, one that sounded like Emma's. Protect her. This human has a name, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the fear flooding his veins. It's Daniel Crane. And this dwelling has kept your daughter alive for 5 weeks while you did nothing. Therian's face went dangerously blank. You dare. I dare, Daniel interrupted, which was either bravery or stupidity or both. I dare because someone had to. You sent an 8-year-old into a dimension not her own, gave her no resources, no protection, no way home. What exactly did you think would happen? I thought, Therian said, each word sharp as a blade, that exile would teach her discipline. That hunger without satiation would cure her of gluttony. Daniel stood up, gently moving Aliana behind him. His body, thin and mortal and utterly outmatched, placed itself between the king and the child. You thought starving your daughter would fix a medical condition? Daniel's voice shook with fury now. You thought cruelty was medicine? You thought. I thought, Therian roared and the air itself shook, that I could not watch her destroy herself anymore. That watching her eat and grow and never stop would kill me before 600 years of battle ever could. Silence fell like snow. Therian's chest heaved. His amber eyes were bright with unshed tears that had probably been building for months. She was perfect, the king whispered. My Aliana, my autumn star, perfect in every way. And then the curse began and nothing I did, no healer I summoned, no magic I wove could stop it. She ate until she wept from pain. She grew until her clothes wouldn't fit. The court whispered. They called her Beast Princess. They said I was being punished for pride, for daring to love a mortal woman, for bringing half-blood into the throne line. Therian's voice broke. And I, Therian the undefeated, king of the autumn threshold, could not protect my own daughter from her own body. So I sent her away where she could not hear the whispers, where I would not have to see my failure reflected in her eyes every day. Daniel stared at this immortal king, this warrior who'd never lost a battle, and saw what Aliana couldn't yet see from behind his legs. A father who had broken under the weight of helplessness, who had made the worst choice possible because he couldn't bear to make no choice at all. You sent her away because you were hurting, Daniel said. Quietly. Not because she was broken. Because you couldn't stand watching her suffer and feeling powerless. Therian flinched like he'd been struck. But she thought, Daniel continued, that you sent her away because she was shameful. Because her existence embarrassed you. Because her hunger made her unlovable. Behind him, Daniel heard Aliana's sharp intake of breath. No, Thrawn breathed, his regal composure shattering completely. He dropped to his knees, armor clanking against dirty concrete. No, Aliana, no. But Aliana was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook her small frame. You couldn't look at me anymore. You said I was too much, that I needed to learn restraint, that I was... I lied, Thrawn said, his voice wrecked. I lied because I could not admit that I, who have ruled for 6 centuries, who have commanded armies and negotiated with gods, could not heal my own child. I could not bear my own powerlessness, so I made you bear it instead. He reached toward her, and Aliana, despite everything, stumbled forward into her father's arms. They clung to each other, immortal king and half-mortal daughter, weeping in a garbage-strewn alley behind a closed electronics store. Daniel stood awkwardly to the side, giving them space, his heart doing complicated things in his chest. After a long moment, Thrawn raised his head. His amber eyes, red-rimmed now, fixed on Daniel. You fed her, the king said. When I failed her, you fed her. I shared what I had, Daniel said simply. It wasn't much. It was everything. Thrawn stood, lifting Aliana easily. The little girl wrapped her arms around her father's neck, her face buried in his copper hair. You showed her kindness when she had been shown only cruelty and abandonment. You saw her as worthy when her own father could not. I saw her as a hungry kid, Daniel said. The rest seemed pretty straightforward. Something like wonder crossed Therion's face. You have no idea what you are, do you, Daniel Crane? Homeless. Broke. Probably depressed. Daniel shrugged. I know what I am. You are a man who places a child's need above his own survival. You are a man who shares his last meal with a stranger. You are, Thrawn said carefully, a man of honor. Daniel laughed, bitter and sharp. I'm really not. I'm just someone who couldn't watch a kid starve. That, Thrawn said, is precisely what honor is. The king shifted Aliana in his arms and looked at Daniel with an expression that might have been respect. I came through the threshold to retrieve my daughter. But I find I am now in your debt, Daniel Crane. You don't owe me anything, Daniel said automatically. Nevertheless. Thrawn gestured and the air shimmered. A small leather pouch appeared in his hand, ornate and clearly valuable. This contains enough gold to... No, Daniel said flatly. Thrawn blinked. No. Keep your gold. I don't want payment for doing the decent thing. Then what do you want? The king asked, clearly confused by this strange human who refused treasure. Daniel looked at Aliana, still clinging to her father but watching Daniel with those luminous green eyes. He thought about what he'd want if Emma had survived, if he'd been given a second chance to do fatherhood right. I want you to figure out what's wrong with her, Daniel said. Really figure it out. Not with magic or healers who call it a curse. With science. With medicine. I want you to take her to doctors who won't judge, who'll run tests and look at genetics and metabolism and hormones. I want you to find out why she's hungry and then help her manage it. Thrawn stared at him. You want medical intervention? I want her to not suffer, Daniel said fiercely. I want her to eat without shame and exist without apology. And if that means you have to swallow your pride and cross back into this dimension to find human doctors who understand metabolic disorders, then that's what I want. Aliana had gone very still in her father's arms. You believe it can be helped? Thrawn asked quietly. Truly? I believe most things can be helped if you're willing to try hard enough, Daniel said. And if you love her, really love her, you'll try everything before you decide she's beyond saving. Therion's throat worked. I never thought she was beyond saving. I thought I was. Then start now, Daniel said. Start by not sending her back to a court that mocks her. Start by finding answers instead of hiding from the questions. Start by being the father she needs, not the king everyone expects. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Aliana lifted her head from her father's shoulder. Daniel Crane, she said formally, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. You gave me food when I was starving. You gave me shelter when I was alone. You gave me kindness when I believed I deserved only shame. She paused. You gave me hope that I could be loved as I am, not as I should be. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. You were always worth loving, Aliana. Always. May I? She looked at her father, who nodded permission. Aliana wriggled down from Therion's arms and crossed to Daniel. She wrapped her small arms around his waist and squeezed with surprising strength. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For showing up. Daniel hugged her back, this impossible child who'd wandered into his life and cracked open the calcified place where his heart used to live. Thank you for letting me. When Aliana finally stepped back, her eyes were bright but clear. She rejoined her father, taking his hand. Thrayon studied Daniel for a long moment. I do not think I will ever truly understand you, Daniel Crane. But I am grateful the universe placed you in my daughter's path. The universe has a weird sense of humor, Daniel agreed. I will do as you suggest, Thrayon said. I will seek human medical knowledge. I will consult your scientists and your doctors. And if they can help Aliana, his voice caught. If they can help her live without pain, then I will owe you more than gold could ever repay. You won't owe me anything, Daniel said again. Just love her. That's enough. Thrayon nodded slowly. Then he raised his hand, and the air began to tear again, reality folding in on itself to create a doorway back to the autumn court. Before stepping through, Thrayon looked back one last time. If you ever have need, the king said, call my name into the wind. I will hear. And I will come. Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Aliana waved, her small hand catching the last rays of sunlight. Goodbye, Daniel Crane. I will remember you. I'll remember you too, Aliana. Be brave. Be kind. Be yourself. She smiled, radiant and true, and then she and her father stepped through the tear in space. Reality sealed itself behind them with a sound like a door closing gently. Daniel stood alone in the alley behind the closed electronics store, surrounded by cardboard and trash bags and the smell of exhaust fumes. He felt lighter somehow. Emptier, but in a good way, the way you feel after crying out grief you didn't know you'd been holding. A kid had been hungry. He'd fed her. A kid had been alone. He'd sat with her. A kid had believed she was unlovable. He'd loved her anyway. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't heroic. It was just showing up. But sometimes, Daniel thought, showing up is the most powerful magic there is. Epilogue. 3 months later, Daniel Crane stood in the lobby of Providence Hospital's psychiatric wing, clean-shaven and sober for 46 days, wearing clothes that didn't smell like garbage. The rehab program had been brutal, 28 days of detox and therapy and confronting every demon he'd been drinking to forget. But the intake counselor had asked him what made him want to try recovery now, after years of giving up, and he'd told her about a starving elf girl and a sandwich split in half. You showed up for her, the counselor had said. Now it's time to show up for yourself. So he had. 1 day at a time, 1 hour when the cravings were bad, 1 minute when the grief felt like it would swallow him whole. He attended AA meetings in church basements. He applied for jobs. Nothing fancy, just maintenance work where his electrical engineering background was still useful. He found a studio apartment in a transitional housing program, a space barely bigger than his cardboard shelter had been but with a door that locked and a bathroom that was his alone. He visited Emma's grave for the first time in 5 years and told her about Aliana. He thought she would have liked the story. And twice, late at night when the loneliness got too heavy, Daniel walked outside and whispered, "Done," into the wind, not really believing anything would happen. But the third time he tried it, the air shimmered. King Thrayon stepped into the parking lot of Daniel's apartment complex, looking wildly out of place in his organic armor beneath the fluorescent security lights. But his face was different, softer somehow, the terrible tension gone. "Daniel Crane," the king said, and his voice held warmth. "You called?" "I did," Daniel admitted. "I wasn't sure if... I promised I would hear. I keep my promises now." Thrayon smiled, and it transformed him into someone almost approachable. "Would you like news of Aliana?" "Yes," Daniel breathed. "Please." Thrayon gestured, and an image formed in the air between them, some kind of magical projection. Aliana appeared, older now, her body filling out into the soft curves of a healthy child. She was laughing, running through what looked like a meadow of impossible flowers, her silver hair streaming behind her. "Your doctors were correct," Thrayon said quietly. "A genetic condition, they called it. Something in the mortal half of her blood that disrupts her body's hunger signals. They cannot cure it, but they can manage it. Medications, structured eating, therapy to address the shame she'd internalized." The image shifted. Aliana sat at a table with other children, elf children, Daniel assumed, eating slowly, smiling between bites. "She eats every 2 hours," Thrayon continued. "Small portions, nutritionally balanced. Her body is learning to recognize satiation. She still struggles some days. But she is not suffering. She is not ashamed." Tears tracked down Daniel's face. "She looks happy." "She is." Thrayon dismissed the image and looked at Daniel directly. "Because a homeless man taught her father that love means showing up, especially when it's hard. Because you gave us a second chance we did not deserve." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Daniel said roughly. Do you believe that for yourself yet? Thrayon asked gently. Daniel thought about his 46 days sober, his studio apartment, the job interview he had next week. I'm working on it. Good. Thrayon reached into the air and pulled out something that glinted gold in the parking lot lights. A small coin on a chain, engraved with symbols Daniel couldn't read. Aliana made this for you. She insisted I deliver it personally. Daniel took the necklace, feeling the surprising weight of it. What is it? A promise, Thrayon said. That you will always have a place in the Autumn Court. That you will always be remembered. That you, Daniel Crane, showed a king what it means to be a father. Daniel's fingers closed around the coin. Tell her I'm proud of her. Tell her yourself someday, Thrayon countered. When you are ready. The door between our worlds will always be open to you. The king began to fade, reality reclaiming him. Thrayon, Daniel called out. Thank you. For listening. For changing. For loving her enough to do the hard thing. Thrayon smiled, and for a moment he looked almost human. Thank you for showing me how. Then he was gone, and Daniel was alone in the parking lot with a gold coin pressed against his palm and tears drying on his face. He went back inside his studio apartment. His home, small but his, and hung the necklace on the wall beside the framed photograph of Emma. Two children he'd loved, connected now by gold chain and memory. Outside, the city hummed its endless song. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Somewhere closer, someone laughed. Daniel Crane lay down on his second-hand mattress and stared at the ceiling, thinking about starving children and impossible kindness and the way love sometimes looked like splitting a sandwich in half. He'd been invisible for so long, a ghost moving through a world that didn't see him. But Aliana had seen him. And in being seen, he'd remembered how to see himself, not as the wreckage of what he'd lost, but as someone who could still choose kindness, who could still show up, who could still matter. In the morning he'd go to his AA meeting. He'd apply for that job. He'd keep building the life he'd thought was beyond saving. But tonight, he let himself feel it. The weight of a child's gratitude, the warmth of a king's respect, the impossible truth that sometimes the smallest acts of mercy echo across dimensions and change more than you could ever imagine. Daniel Crane had shared his last meal with a starving elf girl. And in return, she'd given him a reason to find his first meal as a man who believed he deserved to keep living. Somewhere between their worlds, in the threshold place where autumn reigned eternal, a father tucked his daughter into bed and told her stories about a man who showed up when no one else would. And a little girl with pointed ears and luminous eyes smiled in her sleep, dreaming of sandwiches and kindness and the magic of being loved exactly as you are. Sometimes the weight we choose to carry is lighter than the weight we're forced to bear. And sometimes when we're emptied out and broken down, there's just enough room left inside us for one small act of grace. And that's enough to build an entire world on. Daniel Crane knew this now. And he would carry it with him, one day at a time, one kindness at a time, one moment of showing up at a time, for all the days he had left to live.